There are those among us who skillfully conceal their true intentions behind a mask of harmlessness. At first glance, they may appear friendly, open, and even charming. However, over time, their true nature begins to emerge, and you may not even notice how they are manipulating you, like vampires, draining your energy and undermining your self-confidence. If you are not vigilant, they can plunge your life into chaos, from which it will be extremely difficult to escape. In his time, Carl Jung deeply explored the hidden shadow in human behavior and identified certain signs that may serve as a warning that someone is bringing destruction into your life. It is these signs that will be discussed further. It is important to pay attention to what will be presented in order to recognize in time those who are capable of disrupting your inner peace, and most importantly, to know how to protect yourself from them before it is too late. Watch until the end to make a wise decision. A. Decision to protect your valuable inner world. Energy does not lie. If someone gives you a strange, inexplicable feeling, trust it. Surely, each of us has encountered a situation when, upon first meeting a person, despite their seeming normalcy, a feeling of discomfort arises in the depths of the soul. The person has done nothing wrong, said nothing strange, but something in their gaze, tone of voice, or simply in their presence inexplicably makes you nervous. It is here that many make a mistake, ignoring this internal feeling, because the rational mind convinces, do not judge hastily. Perhaps I am exaggerating. I have no proof that something is wrong. But the subconscious already knows the truth. Carl Jung spoke about our ability to perceive invisible signals long before our minds consciously process them. He called it the collective unconscious, an information system inherited by us through generations, which allows us to feel danger before we can explain it. In other words, intuition is not magic or paranoia, but a warning signal emanating from the depths of our psyche. Let me share with you an instructive story. Once, through a mutual friend, I met a person who, at first glance, made the most favorable impression. He was courteous, his speech flowed smoothly and convincingly, and his smile appeared precisely when it was appropriate. However, despite all the external signs of trustworthiness, something in his presence caused me an inexplicable feeling of anxiety. I could not articulate the reason, but I felt physical discomfort, an unpleasant tightness in my chest, and a vague unease in my stomach, as if my body was insistently signaling, something is not right here. Unfortunately, I decided to neglect these internal signals. After all, how can you judge a person without having good reason to do so? Months passed, and gradually facts began to emerge, indicating that this person was not at all who he seemed at first glance. Behind the mask of friendliness hid manipulative tendencies, a propensity for duplicity and dishonesty. And it was at this moment that an important realization dawned on me. Energy does not deceive, but we often stubbornly refuse to listen to its warnings. If I had trusted my intuition from the very beginning, I would have avoided a lot of trouble and disappointment. The scientific explanation of intuition is not esoteric mysticism, but a deep-seated survival instinct rooted in our psyche. As Carl Jung perceptively explained, intuition is a kind of unconscious knowledge, a stream of information that we perceive on a subconscious level, even before we can put it into words and logical reasoning. Our brain has an amazing ability to capture the smallest micro-expressions on the face, nuances of tone of voice, peculiarities of body language, and other subtle signals that betray a person's true intentions, even if they are desperately trying to hide them. When you experience a strange, inexplicable feeling when meeting someone, it is because your subconscious has already recognized certain behavioral patterns that are associated with past experiences of dangerous situations. Perhaps you noticed a fleeting expression of contempt that escaped conscious view. Perhaps the smile seemed insincere and strained. Perhaps the tone of voice did not match the words spoken. But since your conscious mind cannot instantly decipher and explain these inconsistencies, you perceive them as a vague, intuitive premonition. But here is what is fundamentally important. The vast majority of people neglect these signals because they do not find a rational explanation for them. And this is a colossal mistake that can be costly. How can you learn to distinguish the voice of true intuition from the whisper of paranoia? Of course, we shouldn't suspect everyone, but it's entirely possible to develop the skill of listening to your inner voice without falling into extremes, ignoring it or exaggerating it. That's the key distinction. Intuition manifests quietly but persistently. If something gives you a vague feeling of unease from the start, and that feeling doesn't weaken over time, it's worth paying close attention to. Paranoia, on the other hand, is characterized by intensity and volatility. If you experience excessive suspicion towards many people and your perception is constantly changing, it's most likely a reflection of your internal fears, not a real danger signal. Learn to recognize the signs, because often your subconscious grasps the truth long before your mind can comprehend it. As the famous psychologist Carl Jung said, "The unconscious knows before the conscious." So, next time, don't dismiss an inexplicable feeling of discomfort towards someone, because that subtle initial signal may be the only warning you receive before it's too late. And here's another important point. Some people not only radiate strange energy, but also have the ability to absorb your own. In the next section, we'll talk about how to recognize those who subtly drain your life force and why it's necessary to distance yourself from them immediately. So, energy-stealing people. How to recognize them before they deplete you completely. Pay attention, as this topic is closely intertwined with the previous one. Now that you realize that energy doesn't deceive and that your intuition can perceive what the mind hasn't yet processed, you need to understand one more important thing. Not all people who evoke strange feelings in you manifest themselves obviously. Some don't resort to open attacks or manipulations and don't even seem malicious at first glance. However, after each conversation with them, after each moment spent together, you feel drained, as if something inside you is slowly fading away. You lose enthusiasm, lose clarity of thought, and without noticing it, become exhausted for no apparent reason. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung noted that individuals who have failed to find a personal source of vitality often resort to borrowing energy from others, turning into so-called emotional vampires. The insidiousness of these individuals lies in their initial harmlessness, and sometimes even in their charm. In my life, there was an instance when I encountered such a phenomenon. Upon meeting a certain person, I was struck by his courtesy and willingness to always help. He was an inexhaustible source of entertaining stories and knew how to captivate attention. Charismatic, eloquent, he seemed to radiate magnetic energy. However, after communicating with him, I invariably felt drained. The reasons for this remained a mystery to me for a long time. There was no negativity, arguments, or disagreements in our conversations, but every time after interacting with this person, I felt exhausted. Over time, the truth began to dawn. My acquaintance used communication not as a way to exchange thoughts and feelings, but as a means of absorbing someone else's energy. His conversations were disguised monologues in which he only pretended to be interested in the other person. His presence didn't bring support, but rather was a constant demand for attention and confirmation of his own importance. The most alarming thing was that his emotional exhaustion began to be transmitted to me. Then I realized one of the most dangerous aspects of human relationships. Some people don't cause direct harm. They gradually drain your strength until your own energy supply runs out. Jung argued that people who have failed to accept their shadow side tend to project it onto others. In other words, their internal emptiness, fears, and chaos are shifted onto your shoulders, becoming part of your emotional baggage. There are unmistakable signs that certain people are draining your life force, turning into real energy vampires. First of all, pay attention to the dynamics of communication. Every conversation with such a person invariably devolves into a discussion of their problems. Regardless of the topic, the conversation naturally ends with a stream of complaints, disappointments, and narratives about conflicts. At the same time, the interlocutor doesn't seek to find a way out of the situation, but only seeks to shift the burden of their negative emotions onto your shoulders. Secondly, the manipulator skillfully makes you feel guilty if you're not ready to help immediately. Any attempt to establish personal boundaries is met with hostility, and you're accused of selfishness. When you devote time to yourself, they make it clear how much they need you. This is a subtle psychological game, compelling you to remain close, even when your intuition urges you to distance yourself. Thirdly, the most telling sign is a sense of relief rather than longing when you cease communication with this individual. If someone genuinely enriches your life, their absence feels like a gaping void. However, if a person has been systematically draining your energy, severing ties brings a welcome sense of liberation. The feeling of lightness, both physical and psychological, after ending contact, is a clear indication that the interaction with this person was having a destructive impact on you. Psychologists explain that individuals who unconsciously absorb the energy of others are often unaware of their actions. This often stems from an inability to cope with their own shadow, their internal void. Unable to fill their lives with light and meaning, they attempt to compensate for this deficit by drawing upon the energy of others. It is important to remember that you are not responsible for healing these individuals, nor are you obligated to share in their emotional turmoil. If someone is consistently depleting your resources, you have every right to protect your energy and sever the relationship. Otherwise, you risk imperceptibly burning out and losing your zest for life. However, the situation becomes even more concerning when certain individuals not only drain your energy reserves, but also undermine your confidence in the accuracy of your perception of reality. Next, we will examine the characteristics of people who use covert manipulation to establish control, and the reasons why it is essential to distance yourself from them immediately upon detecting such behavior. Covert manipulation is a situation where someone makes you question your own reality. There exists a form of influence that poses a far greater danger than any overt aggression. It is characterized by its subtlety, is virtually imperceptible, and can erode your self-trust before you even realize it. This refers to situations in which someone deliberately casts doubt on your ability to accurately assess what is happening. As Carl Jung observed, what we try to ignore in ourselves tends to be projected onto others. And some individuals, instead of confronting their own shortcomings, attempt to shift the burden of them onto you. This type of manipulation does not manifest as yelling or direct threats. It manifests in everyday conversations, subtle gestures, words that are presented under the guise of concern. It happens when you are told, "That didn't happen. You imagined it. You're exaggerating as always. I didn't say that. You've got it all wrong." And gradually, you begin to lose confidence in your own perception. Allow me to share a personal experience with you. Some time ago, there was a person in my circle who consistently made me feel that my concerns were unfounded. Every time I shared my anxieties, the reaction was always the same. "It's not that bad. You tend to dramatize things. If it were really a serious problem, others would have noticed it too." At first, I didn't pay much attention to it, assuming that perhaps I was indeed prone to exaggeration and misinterpreted events. However, over time, I noticed a pattern. Every time I spoke about something that was bothering me, this person created the impression that I myself was the source of the problem. And the worst part was, I started to believe it. I was constantly plagued by questions. Am I too sensitive? How reliable is my perception? Maybe the problem is with me, not with the events that are happening. The real danger of this sophisticated manipulation lies in the fact that the aggressor does not launch an open attack, but subtly undermines your self-confidence until you, exhausted by doubts, prefer to remain silent. This phenomenon, known in psychology as gaslighting, is a form of psychological abuse in which the manipulator causes the victim to doubt the adequacy of their own memories, feelings, and perception of reality. As Carl Jung noted, people who avoid confronting their shadow tend to project their internal conflicts onto others. One of the favorite tactics of such individuals is to convince you that the source of the problems lies within you. The essence of gaslighting is not simply to win an argument, but to sow doubt in your soul about your ability to trust your own perception of the world. After all, when a person loses confidence in themselves, they become dependent on external validation, making them vulnerable to control and manipulation. How can you recognize the signs that someone is trying to distort your perception of reality? Firstly, the manipulator constantly rewrites history, deliberately confusing you. Their words, spoken yesterday, are denied today, and actions committed a week ago are declared to have never happened. Any attempt to point out contradictions triggers a wave of accusations of forgetfulness or misinterpretation of events. Secondly, a gaslighter seeks to devalue your emotions. Every expression of feelings is met with belittlement and ridicule. You are convinced of excessive emotionality, inadequacy of reaction, and a tendency to exaggerate, instilling the idea of your madness. They strive to isolate you from the outside world, depriving you of the opportunity to look at the situation from a different point of view. They claim that only they possess a true understanding of what is happening, while everyone else is in ignorance. Such individuals deliberately sever your ties with those who could open your eyes to the truth. After communicating with them, chaos reigns in your head, and there is even less clarity. Instead of enlightenment, you begin to doubt the reality of your own experience. The line between what actually happened and what you are told blurs. If you have ever experienced something like this in a relationship with someone, it is a warning sign calling for vigilance. How do you protect yourself from this subtle but destructive manipulation? First of all, trust your memories and feelings. If something hurt you, then it really happened. Do not let anyone convince you of the rightness or wrongness of your perception. Surround yourself with people who bring clarity to your life, not confuse it even more. Discuss your experiences with someone you trust and compare your vision of the situation with their perspective from the outside. Often, a fresh look from the outside helps to see what is hidden from you by a veil of manipulation. If communicating with someone constantly makes you feel guilty and problematic, it may be time to reconsider those relationships. A genuinely loving person will never play with your perception to make you doubt yourself. The situation becomes even more alarming when you encounter people who not only distort your reality, but also surreptitiously use their dark sides to shift someone else's burden onto you. In the next section, we will look at how to recognize those who project their inner conflicts onto you, placing on you the responsibility for what you are not guilty of. The art of shifting blame, when someone else's shadow falls on you. In the labyrinths of human relationships, there are sometimes manipulations more sophisticated than the notorious gaslighting. This is not just an attempt to make you doubt reality, but a desire to burden you with someone else's inner demons until you accept them as your own. Carl Jung, a perceptive researcher of the human psyche, argued, "Everything that a person rejects in himself is inevitably projected onto others." In other words, instead of facing their weaknesses, fears, and mistakes, an individual tries to shift them onto someone else. Often, that someone else is you. Perhaps you have at some point faced unfair accusations of selfishness, when in reality it was the accuser who was driven by selfish motives. Or you were reproached for excessive coldness, while the true source of emotional detachment was the critic himself. Or maybe you were made to feel guilty for something you were never responsible for. When a person refuses to acknowledge their shadow, they unconsciously try to place its burden on others. Let me share with you a story that sheds light on this phenomenon. Some time ago, I met a person whose life seemed to be a continuous series of conflicts. He constantly complained about betrayal, mistreatment, and universal selfishness. However, observing his behavior, I noticed a striking pattern. He himself committed exactly the acts he accused others of. He despised dissent, demanded unconditional loyalty without offering it in return, and constantly told stories in which he played the role of an innocent victim and everyone else the role of villains. The most surprising thing was that he tried to convince me of my own inadequacy. He claimed that I lacked sensitivity, that I did not appreciate him enough, and that I behaved in the same way as those people he so fiercely condemned. For a while, I really started to doubt myself. What if he is right, and the root of the problem is in me? But then the truth became clear. He simply did not want to see his own shadow, so he tried to impose it on me. He did not want to admit the toxicity of his behavior and desperately needed someone to take on his guilt. When I refused to play this role, he retreated and began looking for another victim onto whom he could place the burden of his shadow. In everyone's life, there are moments when they feel drained, as if carrying an unbearable emotional burden on their shoulders. During such periods, it is worth asking yourself, do these experiences really belong to you, or were they imposed from the outside? People prone to psychological projection typically avoid taking responsibility for their actions and feelings. They skillfully manipulate situations, portraying themselves as victims and shifting blame onto others. So, how can you protect yourself from such negative influences? First and foremost, it's essential to learn to distinguish your own emotions and experiences from those of others. When you are accused of something, conduct an honest self-analysis. If you genuinely made a mistake, acknowledge it. However, if you feel that you are being forced to feel guilty or responsible for something that doesn't belong to you, confidently reject it. Clearly define your boundaries and do not allow others to transfer their emotional baggage onto you. If you notice that someone is constantly trying to dump their negativity and emotional chaos on you, immediately distance yourself from that person. Your task is not to heal those who do not wish to work on themselves, but that's not all. There are people who not only project their negative qualities onto you, but also secretly envy your success and prosperity. In the next section, we will examine how to recognize such hidden enemies and why it is important to end communication with them as soon as possible. There are people who enjoy spending time with you, admire you, and share joyful moments with you. However, deep down, they cannot reconcile themselves to the fact that you shine brighter than them. They do not express their envy openly, do not attack you directly, and do not commit actions that could be clearly interpreted as hostile. But every time you reach new heights, their attitude toward you changes. They stop congratulating you on your successes, downplay your achievements, and find ways to devalue your efforts. And if you look closely, you will realize that this is not a coincidence, but a pattern. According to the insightful Carl Jung, envy is nothing more than a sinister shadow that a person casts on those around them. If an individual has not managed to sort out the intricacies of their internal contradictions, if their heart has not healed from the wounds of disappointment, it becomes unbearable for them to see someone else's triumph where their own ambitions have remained unsatisfied. And the insidiousness of this situation lies in the fact that the carriers of this hidden envy are often in close proximity to you. These are not some distant rivals or detractors, but those whom you consider friends, family members, people from your inner circle who secretly harbor resentment towards your progress and achievements. Allow me to share a personal experience with you. In my immediate circle, there was a person whom I considered a true friend. He was always there, supporting me, until I began to develop rapidly and reach new heights. But as soon as I achieved something significant, his attitude towards me underwent a drastic change. His words no longer sounded like sincere support, but rather like doubts, skillfully disguised as good advice. Every time I got excited about a new project, he would hastily declare, "Well, that's not so original. Are you sure you can do it? After all, many people are already doing something similar. I don't know if it's worth your time." At first, I naively believed that he was just trying to help me stay realistic and not get my head in the clouds. However, over time, I began to notice a sinister pattern. It wasn't healthy objectivity or friendly advice, but a subtle, barely perceptible attempt to belittle my achievements, to devalue my efforts. The most interesting thing was that this person happily celebrated the successes of other people. But as soon as I moved forward, achieved some goal, he began to experience obvious discomfort. At some point it dawned on me that insidious envy rarely appears in its true form. It is not always open hostility or outright attacks. More often, it is masked under the guise of friendship, support, and feigned closeness, because there are people who strive to keep you close, but only as long as your success does not overshadow their own achievements. Envy rarely manifests in aggressive outbursts. It hides in subtle gestures, in the most delicate reactions that betray genuine feelings. If, when sharing joyful news, you do not see sincere joy in response, but only indifference or embarrassed confusion, you should be wary. If instead of congratulations, flaws are hastily sought in your success, doubts are sown, your achievements are belittled in every possible way, this is a disturbing signal. If you notice how enthusiastically other people's victories are celebrated, while coldness or detachment is shown towards your successes, there is something more behind this. The gradual distancing as you move through life is not accidental. It's not about your imaginary changes, but about the fact that someone else's shadow cannot withstand your radiance. As Jung said, a person who is not aware of their own shadow projects it onto others. Envious people often do not recognize their feelings. They do not consider themselves envious, do not admit that their words, behavior, and coldness are dictated by a sense of resentment. Instead of battling their own inner demons, they channel their energy into trying to stop you. It's not always obvious, not always manifested in open attacks, but it's always felt in subtle remarks that plant seeds of doubt. If you don't recognize these signs in time, their influence can lead you to unwittingly slow your pace, lower your ambitions, and feel guilty for striving for more. And if you don't break this vicious cycle in time, you risk dimming your own light just to avoid embarrassing those around you. How do you protect yourself from the invisible bonds of envy, that insidious feeling that subtly undermines relationships? There is no need to engage in open confrontation or prove your worth. The main thing is to learn to recognize the hidden signs and keep a respectful distance from those who radiate them. Create an atmosphere of genuine support around yourself. Surround yourself with people for whom your success is a cause for joy, not a source of hidden threat. Let your growth inspire them, not breed envy. The true value of relationships is revealed in the fact that your triumph does not cause discomfort, does not slow down your development, does not create doubts, but on the contrary, serves as an incentive for new achievements. Of particular danger are those who not only envy or skillfully manipulate your perception, but are able to plunge your life into chaos, the scale of which is difficult to even imagine. These are people who go beyond simple manipulation or energy vampirism. Their presence can destroy your emotional and mental stability, jeopardizing your future. They do not wear warning signs on their foreheads. On the contrary, they often appear in the guise of friends, partners, people with whom you feel a special connection. However, over time, the same ominous pattern emerges. They burst into your life with powerful energy. Their presence initially seems exciting and magnetic, but gradually they begin to sow chaos, confusion, drama, and instability around them. And before you realize it, you find yourself drawn into their destructive whirlwind. As Jung said, there are people driven by their shadow, unaware of their internal conflicts, and instead of confronting them, spreading them everywhere, destroying everything in their path. Some time ago, fate brought me together with a person whose aura literally sparkled with originality. Possessing magnetic charm and an authoritative presence, he knew how to speak in such a way that every word resonated with a feeling of meeting an exceptional person. From the very beginning of our communication, I was captivated by the intensity of his energy. Our conversations never touched on superficial topics, but delved into the depths of human feelings. He shared fascinating stories, episodes that seemed to have come from the pages of a movie script. At first, this was attractive, but gradually, I began to notice a disturbing trend. This person's life was a continuous chaos. He constantly found himself at the epicenter of problems, like a magnet attracting new dramas and crises. Conflicts with others became commonplace for him, and stability and peace seemed like unattainable dreams. The worst part was that I, without realizing it, found myself drawn into this vortex of events. What at first seemed like exciting intensity turned into exhausting depletion. A deep connection turned into emotional manipulation, and authenticity turned out to be just a mask, hiding an endless cycle of problems, ups and downs, and turbulent passions. In the end, the truth was revealed to me in all its ugliness. This person was not trying to escape from the embrace of chaos, because his personality was inextricably linked to it. By keeping me close, he involved me in his troubled world, making me an accomplice to his personal drama. The main warning was the realization that chaos haunted him everywhere, like a curse. It is important to be able to distinguish between a person who is temporarily going through difficult times and someone who is constantly living in a state of disorder. If you see that there is not a single stable area in a person's life, if he is constantly surrounded by conflicts, if his past is full of turbulent stories with everyone who was nearby, then be sure, sooner or later, you will become the next victim of his emotional storm. Pay attention to his life path. If every relationship ends in drama, if every friendship turns into conflict, if all the opportunities in his life have been missed due to destructive behavior, do not naively believe that everything will be different with you. You are no exception, just like anyone else. Carl Jung once insightfully remarked, "As long as the unconscious sleeps, it subtly controls our lives, and we naively call it fate." And indeed, people who are unaware of the dark corners of their souls are doomed to repeat the same destructive scenarios over and over again, refusing to change and escaping from stability. If you find yourself next to such people, their inner storm will inevitably become yours too. How does one defend oneself from those who sow chaos? Do not attempt to be their savior. Do not delude yourself into thinking you can change their ingrained habits. Do not feed yourself with futile hopes for a brighter future. If a person is mired in chaos and has no desire to escape it, you have only one option left: distance yourself. Shield yourself from the destructive influence. Surround yourself with people who radiate emotional stability. Create your own world where order and harmony reign, and do not allow anyone to destroy it. After all, if someone brings chaos into every aspect of their life, it is only a matter of time before they try to bring it into yours as well. If you have read this far, then you have grasped a truth that many take years to realize. Not everyone you meet on your life path has good intentions. Some, like energy vampires, subtly drain your life force. Others skillfully manipulate you, making you doubt your own sanity. There are also those who project their internal conflicts onto you, placing an unbearable burden on your shoulders, while others simply cannot stand your success and try in every way to dim your light. But the most dangerous of all is the person who lives in chaos and seeks to involve those around them in it. Jung taught us that our inner balance and well-being are directly dependent on our awareness of the energies circulating around us. This is not about living in constant fear, but about learning to recognize dangerous signals and taking seriously the energetic message we receive from other people. Only in this way can you protect yourself before it is too late. Remember, distancing yourself from those who bring nothing good into your life is not selfishness. Setting boundaries is not a sign of coldness. Trusting your intuition is not an exaggeration. It is your inalienable right and your personal responsibility. After all, those who do not protect their inner world risk losing it sooner or later. The art of rewording is about breathing new life into an existing text without distorting its original meaning. It is important that the size of the reworked material matches the original, preserving the structure and sequence of presentation. If necessary, details and examples can be added to support the size of the text and make the narrative more rich. Enriching vocabulary and grammatical structures is a key element of successful rewording. Synonyms, metaphors, and a variety of syntactic turns avoid monotony and make the text more attractive to the reader. It is important to strive for each sentence to sound fresh and original, avoiding repetitions and hackneyed phrases. It must be remembered that rewording should not change factual information. Proper names, terms, numbers, and other specific data must remain unchanged. This ensures that the text retains its accuracy and reliability. The tone and style of the reworded text should match the original. Whether it is a serious scientific study or a light humorous sketch, it is important that the new version of the text conveys the same mood and attitude to the topic as the original material. Maintaining stylistic coloring ensures that the text is perceived correctly. The main goal of rewording is to make the text more understandable and interesting without losing its main idea. The reader should easily grasp the essence of the message, even if the words and phrases have been changed. Clarity and accessibility are what you should strive for when rewording.